Never mind individuals that have had beef with the X-Men, there are also whole teams of heroes out there that have actively fought against them. Welcome back, Nerd Squad, it's me, Amanda. Today we are counting down another top 10 superheroes who hate the X-Men on this part 2. Who do you think has the biggest beef with the X-Men in the superhero community? Number 10. Medusa. You could argue that Medusa really hated the X-Men at one point. Adam talked a bit about the Inhumans vs X-Men event on part 1 of this list. While Black Bolt is their king, Medusa is or was at the time their queen. She herself had a pretty feisty exchange with Emma Frost during the conflict, who was leading her own team of X-Men, with the two women's conflict coming to blows and them actually fighting one another directly during the Inhumans vs X-Men story. Following that conflict being resolved, Medusa even stepped down from her role as queen as a result. That's how much this whole thing affected her. The conflict with the X-Men left her feeling as though she had failed her own people by leading them into this war. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? Thank you. Number 9. War Machine. There was a time when War Machine actually led his own team of Sentinels against mutants, or at least to observe and track mutants, which is still pretty bad, honestly. Sounds shocking, right? But it's true. He was chosen to become the direct commanding officer of his own Sentinel squad. Most Sentinels, of course, don't need a commanding officer because they themselves are like AI robots, which are used to attack and target mutant kind. But in this case, the Sentinels in question were piloted armor. The squad was known as Sentinel Squad 1, ONE, and they were part of 1, which stands for Office of National Emergency. 1 was basically activated by the President of the United States following the events of M-Day. While Rhodey himself is not known for really hating mutants, his actions here were definitely antagonistic towards them, even if he didn't perhaps see it that way at the time or intend it to be like that. I mean, you know, to Rhodey he's just working with the government, but also, I don't know man, I feel like if you're watching mutants that's pretty messed up. Number 8. Doctor Strange. What? The X-Men and Doctor Strange have beef? When? How? Why? Well, we're not talking about Stephen Strange here, but former Doctor Strange, Clea Strange, the wife of Stephen. The sort of wife of Stephen. Sort of. It's complicated. Basically his longtime love interest, who he is separated from, but who every now and then comes back to remind everyone, you know, she's still his wife, even though that point kind of seems murky at best, and I don't think they were ever actually formally married, but you know, they do, or did, have rings. So, yeah. Clea during the Hellfire Gala of 2022 had some very tense moments with the mutants, not really specifically the X-Men as they stand now, but at least a former member of the X-Men, Emma Frost. Clea came to the gala and requested to speak to Emma in the hopes that she might be able to help her resurrect Stephen, who had recently died during the events of the death of Doctor Strange. It had just been revealed to the world that mutant kind had the power to basically bring back their dead, and Clea was basically hoping they might be able to help her in reviving Stephen. But, of course, Emma refused. Instead, actually suggesting that maybe Clea would be a better Sorcerer Supreme than her husband was. Now, despite this being technically a compliment, Clea did not take the response very well. She was actually pretty peeved. Number 7. Alpha Flight. After consulting with our resident Alpha Flight expert, Andrew, I learned that, as I suspected, Alpha Flight has had beef with the X-Men, mainly involving Wolverine. Despite the fact that Wolverine himself has been a member of Alpha Flight, the team have also constantly made attempts to kidnap Wolverine and take him back to Canada, because they basically have seen him as essentially government property. Well, that doesn't sound very polite or very Canadian-like to me as a fellow Canadian, but that's basically the tea there. Eventually, Wolverine and Alpha Flight would work things out, and currently they are on very good terms with the Knucklehead, but there was a time when they had a very real problem with the X-Men and some serious jealousy issues, it seems, in regards to their attachment to Wolverine, which I mean, I kinda get. Wolverine's pretty cool. If he was on my team too and he was like, "Okay, I'm leaving," I'd be like, "No, get back here." I don't know if I'd kidnap him though. I feel like that's not very nice. Shouldn't go around kidnapping people. Number 6. Miss Marvel. Carol Danvers, now known as Captain Marvel, has had a complicated history with mutant kind, to put it mildly. Initially, her powers were stolen by then mutant villain Rogue. Rogue didn't even really mean to actually steal Carol's powers per se, it was kind of just a result of her attacking Carol that this happened, because I mean that's what Rogue does, those are her powers, she like takes the power away from people, takes their life energy, and at the time her powers were very volatile and uncontrollable. She since has come into her own and even has become a hero, and is actually more well known for being a hero than a villain at this point, I'd say. And while even after Rogue became a hero, many of her powers, to this day even, still came and come from Carol Danvers, who was then known as Miss Marvel, there has also been a history of friendship with Carol and the X-Men team. Professor X and the X-Men actually took Carol in after she lost her memories and her powers following her interaction with Rogue. And Carol actually fought alongside the X-Men as part of their team for quite some time, basically being an ally to them, despite not even being a mutant. But she has definitely had a big beef with Rogue in the past, and Rogue has been an X-Man. We cannot deny either of these facts, so hence why she's on this list. Number 5, the Fantastic Four. We discussed how much Reed Richards seems to dislike the mutants on part 1 of this list, and while Adam also touched upon all the times the FF have actually worked alongside the mutant team as their allies, as has Reed. Remember when he made Dazzler that super pocket radio? Super cool. The whole team has actually gone up against the X-Men multiple times. In fact, they have 2 miniseries that are kind of based around that idea. The first one is from the 80s, Fantastic Four versus the X-Men, pretty on the nose there with the title, and the second is more recent from 2020, titled simply X-Men/Fantastic Four, but it's less about X-Men and Fantastic Four coming together and a little bit more about why they clash with each other, at least at the beginning. The second ends with Professor X literally wiping Reed's mind of the knowledge of how to remove the X gene. No matter the reason, I don't think any of the FF would be down with involuntary mind wipes of any of their teammates, Reed included. Probably especially Reed. I mean, he needs that. He needs his mind to do science. Number 4, Punisher. The Punisher has an ongoing feud with one specific X-Man, and that's generally Wolverine. While the two have also teamed up together in the past, their relationship is often depicted as being rocky at best, and the two have come to blows multiple times. I would call this one more of an ongoing rivalry or feud that is mainly fueled by writers and fans who bicker about, which one of them is the toughest around, which one of them's the toughest guy. That's me being a fan that's just bickering about tough guys. Although I've definitely done that before and I don't sound like that when I do it. Or do I sound like that? Maybe I do. Personally, I would say Wolverine is tougher if I'm getting into that bickering argument debate with fellow nerds, both mentally and literally. But I also respect those who take Frank's side. After all, Frank is still a super tough person, and I'm not going to try to argue that he's not. Still really tough, so fair if you prefer Frank. Number 3, the Inhumans. We've now talked about Black Bolt and Medusa specifically on the channel, but the Inhumans in general kind of have good reason to hate the X-Men, thanks to mostly Emma Frost. Initially, the Inhumans were actually trying to cancel the feud with the X-Men in Inhumans vs. X-Men, also known by the short form name of IVX. Truly, this story was a little bonkers in regards to, making the conflict here make sense, but hey, if editorial comes to you and they say this is a story that has to happen, you kind of have to come up with some reason, so I don't even think we can blame creatives on this one, because I'm pretty sure this story came from editorial wanting it to happen, not creatives pitching it. The reason we were given here for this weird fight is that the Terrigen mists were released on Earth but ended up acting as basically a poison to the mutants. As such, the X-Men and mutant kind felt very targeted, and they did some not so cool things in response to try to hurt the Inhumans. Emma Frost led the charge and she pumped everyone up by staging a telepathic public death of Cyclops, which wasn't real, he had already died at that point, and this whole thing was blown out of proportion when the Inhumans initially actually tried to resolve this issue peacefully, but were attacked when they attempted to even extend an olive branch, which incited the war between the two groups. So while they didn't want to hate the mutants initially, that wasn't their goal here, it certainly did turn out that way by the end, or at least by the midway through the story. Though really everyone turned on Emma when they learned how she'd manipulated them, the mutants, into fighting against the Inhumans, because yeah, not a great look for Emma Frost. Number 2, Hulk. Hulk is well known for his beef with Wolverine. I mean, Wolverine literally first appeared in a Hulk comic where, he was the villain, or at the very least he was the antagonist of that tale. Hulk also at one point attacked the mutants during World War Hulk. Granted, he had less of a beef with the X-Men than he did with their at one time mentor Professor X, who he wanted due to his connection with the Illuminati, because at that time the Hulk was like, the Illuminati messed up my life. But still, the fact that the X-Men were not involved in what had happened to Hulk on the planet Sakaar did not stop him from attacking other mutants initially. They basically had to shame Hulk into walking away in order to survive that fight, and even then Hulk seemed like he didn't really want to back down. And of course there have been other mutants in the past who have come to blows with Hulk besides, so it's not even the only time that this has happened or the only folks that have been affected. Number 1. Avengers. I mean, we touched on it a bit on part 1 of this list when Adam talked about Captain America and Iron Man. He even talked about another few Avengers as well that have beef with the X-Men and mutant kind in general on his part 1. If you want to know who exactly was included, I highly recommend checking it out, but I digress. You've probably heard of a little well-known event called Avengers vs. X-Men. This event stood to highlight some of the feuds between the two teams and their individual members that have been brewing for basically years. Chiefly though, the fight was over the Phoenix Force in terms of the story here. The Phoenix was returning to bond with, as the mutants believed, its current ideal host, Hope Summers. The Avengers wanted it gone. The two fought each other, which now seems ironic since although the Phoenix has long been linked to mutants and mutant-based stories and the Avengers were very anti-Phoenix at that time, the Avengers now work with the Phoenix themselves as the Force is currently bonded with Avenger member Echo. So, love how they thought about it and then they were just like, well, that's you know, now we're gonna use the Phoenix, now it's our buddy. Weird. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I was raised to believe that the word hate is a very strong word, so I'd more say that these are characters or groups who have actively had, in my terms, a strong dislike for the X-Men or mutants in general at one point. That being said, one of my favorite things about Heroes is that they actively try to promote love instead of hate. They don't try to hate people, really ever. So keep that in mind, and after enjoying this list, why not spread some love today? Why not, you know, go out of your way to make somebody's day special? I think that's an important thing. Goodness knows the world always could use more love and positivity in it. Thank you for watching. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube. Bye!